Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. We welcome in an old friend today.
Yeah, today Bill Price, former U.S. Attorney in the Western District, is going to come back and talk to us about some things that went on a number of years ago, some prosecutions he headed, and some of the lessons we learned or didn't learn from those activities. But he's a very active guy in the community. We're thrilled that he'd come back and talk to us about this.
Been involved in a lot of interesting endeavors. Bill Price, today's guest on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I like the idea of improvisation and starting with not a preconceived idea. All of my work is about visual images taken from my memory. I'm Brenda Kingery. I am an artist and I'm a proud Chickasaw. One time I said, "Oh God, please don't let me die with my paintings in the closet." And what I would want them to be is everywhere. I would want them to be loved, to be used, to be respected. You work your whole life doing this. You just keep going as long as you can. And I have such a good background with a 106-year-old grandmother that I've always thought in my mind I would just paint till I'm 106. My Chickasaw heritage has become a primary part of my life. And the reason is, it's a place I call home.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Today we're thrilled to have a personal friend of Mick and me on as our guest, Bill Price, former U.S. Attorney in the Western District of Oklahoma. Bill is a criminal litigation attorney, but quite frankly spends an awful lot of time on nonprofit work in the education field. He's well known there. He's rendered great public service to our children through his work on education. He did his undergraduate work at Georgetown, did his law work at the University of Oklahoma. He spent many years in the U.S. Attorney's Office and first as an assistant and then later as the U.S. Attorney from 1982 to 1989. He had many high-profile prosecutions in the U.S. Attorney's Office, some dealing with the Penn Square Bank matter, some dealing with the county commissioner scandal, and we're going to talk to him about that today. Bill, welcome. Sure glad to have you back.
Great to be here.
We'll do this kind of in reverse order. Let's talk about what you're doing now. What's Bill Price do these days?
Well, I'm spending just as much time as I did before, but primarily on things that don't pay me. I'm on the state school board.
You come on The Verdict.
Right. Also on the School Choice Coalition and a whole bunch of nonprofits like Shiloh Christian Camp for underprivileged kids.
Yeah.
And really trying to do educational matters, trying to improve the educational system.
We want to talk about a lot of the things you did a long time ago, but let's while we're on that topic, tell us about education today and charter schools and those types. What are your views on all those issues?
Well, recently we've passed some great laws. The charter school bill is great. It expands charters beyond Oklahoma City and Tulsa. We have a tax credit scholarship bill that, again, helps poor kids be able to go to a lot of these schools like Positive Tomorrows and St. John's Christian Heritage Academy, a lot of great schools that can pull kids out of poverty. And it provides competition for the regular public schools, and the experience has shown that currently in Oklahoma, there's about 2% charters and about 4% private schools. And when you get up to 10, 15%, you tend to change the regular public school system. You tend to approve it because they have to compete. And so that's what we're looking forward to. And reforms in general, getting more money into the classroom. and less into administration, because we spend too much on administration in Oklahoma.
Let me focus in a little more on something you just said. I've been to Positive Tomorrows and observed it, but we've never done a show on it, and frankly, we probably ought to. But would you tell our viewers what Positive Tomorrows is and what it does?
It's a school for homeless kids, and the effect of things like tax credit scholarships are that a business or individual is able to donate money to schools like that, and there's 29 of them signed up in the state, and they're able to get a tax credit for it. And it actually saves the public school system money, because it's a lot cheaper than the public school system educating that same kid, and it fills all kinds of niches in the state. We're pushing next year for what's called an education savings account, which is even more of a innovative program to allow parents control over the education of their kids, and not being just forced to go to the local public school, but have choices to be able to go to a Positive Tomorrows or go to any number of different schools that may fit more the aptitude and skills of their kids.
All right, let's get back in your history now. Your educational background, up to the point where you were appointed U.S. Attorney, how prepared were you for that role?
Well, I graduated from Georgetown School of Foreign Service. I came back to Oklahoma. I was involved in law practice for a couple of years, and then became an assistant, and I was an assistant for 7 years under 4 different U.S. attorneys, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So the first case I worked on was under Bill Burkett, was David Hall. And that was just because I was the only one that didn't have any cases to work. So I did briefs and was involved in the interview of witnesses and such. So I had a great deal of experience. I became first assistant and then became U.S. Attorney in '82. And the county commissioner case, for instance, was my case as an assistant, and then carried over a little bit into the time I was U.S. Attorney.
So you're named U.S. Attorney just as the Penn Square crisis hits Oklahoma City.
Yeah, it was great timing. And that generated unbelievable amount of civil litigation too. Our civil section became just totally inundated, in addition to this highly complicated criminal investigation.
Looking back, not necessarily the work you were active involved with in 1982 in Penn Square Bank, but how do you judge the FDIC's actions? Did they work appropriately? Should they have, in hindsight, done things differently?
Well, one of the problems everybody talks about, should they have done like they did in most banks and sold the bank to someone? One of the problems with Penn Square is, you really put on Jennings that he bears the brunt of the civil and moral obligation or responsibility for bringing down that bank. The recklessness of putting Patterson in charge of all lending. But the last 6 months or so, Patterson was shifting from bad borrowers to good borrowers, loans without their knowledge, and doing all kinds of strange things. Well, the problem with that is when you start to look at that and try to then sell the bank to somebody, and people were coming in saying, that's not my loan, I didn't sign for that loan, it created a horrible problem in terms of trying to sell the bank instead of liquidating the bank.
They didn't know what some of those liabilities might be.
The contingent liabilities went through the roof. And so an unintended consequence of them trying to save the bank by keeping everything alive and selling it to upstream banks was they made that bank unsellable. And so when people talk about the FDIC probably acted too quickly, they probably acted too late. there was, and really the problem came about because it was impossible to determine the liabilities.
Yeah, the bank was just, there was just nothing left but bad things.
Yeah.
And very few bankers want to say, oh gosh, I'd like to buy that bad thing that has no positive thing other than a name which has been discredited and a location which is not correct for a bank. There was just nothing there.
And if you can discern the bad things, if you know it's 10 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar, whatever it is, that's one thing. But when you have no idea what it is, that is not very doable. Now, the real victims are, you know, somebody put their life savings in $400,000, let's say, and you know, they get $100,000 on the FDIC insurance, or their pension. You know, they're one of many people that their pensions are there. It might be a small amount of money, and they lost it all. So you had thousands and thousands of victims of this, and it's a horrible shame that they had to liquidate. And I've heard horror stories of the liquidation that, you know, you ended up getting, you know, pennies on the dollar by the time it happened. And the criticism is that maybe they shouldn't have liquidated. But it was probably an inevitable consequence of the way it came down.
Are there similarities between what happened then and events that have happened more recently?
Not really. No, not really in the sense of the liquidation. But there are definitely similarities between, we haven't learned our lesson, definitely. You know, the whole idea that energy prices were never going to go down. I mean, recently we were in that national myth the same way, and they did go down.
And they are down today.
And they are down today. You know, you had this national myth that we were in shortage, and you know, it's amazing how technology and fracking and horizontal drilling have a way of changing those national myths. But also, you had the same thing in 2008, and there are tremendous similarities.
Let's go to a break at that point. We'll come back and let Bill expound on the idea that the theater that was Penn Square Bank and the banking industry and the energy industry in that era has similarities to the mortgage crisis of 2008, 2009. We'll be right back on The Verdict.
People have been talking about energy independence for a long time. It's always been popular, but today it's possible.
We have an enormous supply of oil and gas in the United States, much more than we thought just a few years ago.
New technology, massive new discoveries, largely made by Oklahoma companies. It literally changes everything.
And Oklahoma is leading the charge. Go watch this video to see why. Energy independence starts with us.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers and our guest Bill Price. When we left, we were going to make some comparisons to Penn Square Bank and what happened to the banking and energy industry with the mortgage crisis of 2008?
There was a similar national myth in 2008 that housing prices were never going to go down, and obviously they did. Secondly, there was a lot of bad government policies in 2008. They were pushing Freddie and Fannie to push mortgages on people that couldn't afford it. Just like there were bad government policies back during the time of Penn Square. You had price controls on most natural gas, and then you had 10 times greater prices on the deep gas. It's the analogy that I always loved was it's like allowing fruit to be picked by helicopters, but making it illegal to pick fruit from ladders. and you get a disconnect in the market because of that. And then the final disconnect is you separated the origination of the loan from the risk. Just like in Penn Square, the people that originated the loan were Penn Square, and the people that had the risk were the upstream banks.
Yeah.
And Penn Square didn't care as long as they could get it to the upstream banks. Well, in the same way, in the mortgage crisis, the people originating the loans, they sold it upstream, and they could care less if they failed. Mm-hmm. And there ought to be a connection between between reward and risk.
Yeah. Let's change the topic still on your experience in the Penn Square Bank matter. You were the prosecuting attorney when Bill Patterson went to trial.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, when it came down to it, we prosecuted several cases like, Tom Orr's case. It was a standard kickback case. He was the largest quarter horse dealer in the United States, and it was a standard kickback. And John Lytle up in Continental was a standard kickback case. It was a little different on Patterson. He wasn't making money. He wasn't stealing money. But what he was doing was when everything started to go south, he was shifting loans without the knowledge of the borrowers from bad borrowers to good borrowers to look good to the regulators. And he was moving interest upstream to make it look to the upstream banks like they were performing loans. And he was doing these kind of things, and it was really, without the knowledge of Jennings. We just had everybody telling us, every secretary saying, Patterson would say, do this, but don't tell Jennings about it. So we couldn't build, that was the criminal part of the case.
Yeah.
And so we couldn't build even remotely a criminal case on Jennings. Now, civil responsibility, moral responsibility, it all lies there. But the criminal part of the case was this cover-up of trying to shift things around to keep this ball rolling. Well, is that the worst thing in the world? You're not stealing, but you're trying to keep something afloat. We felt an obligation to prosecute this thing. It was a real difficult prosecution because all these borrowers had all the motivation in the world to lie. Yeah. They weren't the greatest witnesses in the world. But you had to put on a whole bunch of them, or people would think, that one of them is lying. The best witnesses we had were some of the secretaries that loved Bill Patterson, but would testify that he said to do this without the borrowers knowing. We had some really bad instructions. The foreman of the jury, who was a college professor, told us afterwards that after he heard the evidence, he was convinced that they were going to have to convict, and after he heard the instructions, he was convinced they were going to have to acquit. The fact is that we shipped everything up immediately to Chicago right afterwards. he ended up convicted in Chicago, got about the same sentence he would have had here. We weren't after some super long sentence, so the outcome was the same. But it was something that had to be done. You just couldn't ignore all these things that were done to hide it from the examiners.
I want to shift gears, if we may, away from Penn Square Bank and go to one of the biggest scandals that's ever been experienced, perhaps not the biggest, but one of, in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma County Commissioners scandal. Now, you were deeply involved in that really as early as your assistant U.S. attorney days, were you not?
Absolutely.
Can you give us a little bit about that?
I started on that in...
and what the wrong was, what was going on.
Absolutely. In '78, I started on it as an assistant U.S. attorney and spent a huge amount of my time all the way through the time. In '82, I became U.S. attorney, and then most of the prosecutions were finished by about '83 or so. They fell into different categories. Half of the material bought since statehood by counties, according to the suppliers, didn't exist. It was non-existent materials that were split 50-50 between the supplier and the commissioner. The money was split.
Just a sham transaction.
Total sham transaction. The other half were 10% kickbacks. Now you think 10%, that's not much, but 10% kickbacks, by the time you hit it tax-wise, by the time you hired a middleman to do this transaction, costs the county 40% on higher prices. And when we prosecuted it, all the prices dropped 40% to the counties.
Well, how many county commissioners were involved?
Well, we
number-wise,
convicted 240 county commissioners and suppliers. About 65 of them were suppliers. And the rest were county commissioners. It's the largest political corruption case in American history, even to this day. And it caused some reforms, and it certainly caused some fear out there that is probably...
Well, we're number one in something.
And you know, the thing is, we aren't any worse than the entire southern half of the United States that has our system of county government. In Texas, it flowed over to northeastern Texas, and all of northeastern Texas, the prices dropped enormously, and the rest of Texas, they stayed the same. That tells you something.
How many of them went to trial?
Well, we won the first, probably 10, 15, something like that. The first groupings went to trial, and all the other lawyers for the rest of them tended to watch, and then they went so well that it caused a cascade
of pleas.
The thing that still is undone so far, that I want so much to do, is that the suppliers that dealt in northern Oklahoma and southern Kansas would tell us that 95% of their business in northern Oklahoma was corrupt, and 95% of their business in southern Kansas was honest. And you ask why? Same people, same culture, same everything. They have a county manager system of government. And the commissioners are part-time. They tend to be a retired rancher, retired banker, whatever. And they appoint a full-time county commissioner. It's a lot cheaper because, and they can hire, and generally it was a person with an engineering degree, and it is much more efficient. They tended to have one county yard instead of 3. And so the thing that I would like to do someday is have our legislature at least have a home rule so counties can choose the county manager system if they want to.
Bill Price is our guest. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Thank you
very much.
You've done a wonderful job.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we get back.
There are now 11 million of us who live here and work here. I was 15 when I came here 6 years ago. I raised my family here. I drive my truck to my job every day. The only difference between now and 6 years ago, I do it legally. I wanted to. Because this is my home.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I really think people are so unaware of the number of kids waiting just in Oklahoma. And I think if more people knew that those children were out there waiting, I think that just by the way we live our lives and the people we talk to, that maybe we can help encourage adoption from Oklahoma.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers wrapping up a very interesting show with Bill Price.
Yes, Bill was very kind to give us his time, and he has done a marvelous job in the past as U.S. Attorney and his criminal prosecution work, but he's also doing a really wonderful work for education in Oklahoma right now.
Great to have Bill Price on a future show.
We're going to get him back.
Get a little deeper into the county commissioner issue and how that's pertinent to today's life in Oklahoma. We also have a website we'd love for you to log on and tell us about a guest you'd like to see on an upcoming edition of The Verdict. That website is theverdict.tv. That's theverdict.tv. Thanks so much for joining us today. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week right here on The Verdict.